Dr. Hashim, many people may be surprised you're here. They'd say gas is part of the problem. You should be stopping gas production, and maybe we'd have fewer problems with climate change.
Well, gas at the moment represents about 21% of the total energy mix, and we believe that this is an important part of the solution rather than the problem. And we know that going by 2030, gas will actually be the second largest fuel after oil, and the gas usage will be about 25% by then. So we cannot be part of the problem when we're actually growing as far as gas is concerned.
But you can be part of the problem if emissions are rising, and the whole point of this conference is to lower emissions. How can it be that increasing gas production helps cure or solve the problems of climate change?
Well, as far as we are concerned, gas actually, if you compare, say, in terms of emission compared to coal, we are at least about 40 to 70% less than coal as far as emissions are concerned. And going forward, in terms of going for renewables, as far as sustainable energy is concerned, gas, which actually provide the baseload production of electricity, as compared to the intermittency of both wind as well as solar in that sense. So we believe gas will actually be around for a long, long time to come.
Okay, what steps are the gas industry taking in lowering their emissions? We briefly talked about carbon capture and sequestration. It seems very clear that while there have been a number of prototype models made, nothing seems to work, particularly on an economic basis. Where are we standing with that?
Well, there are a few approaches as far as getting gas to be green. One, of course, is the production of biogas, from renewable sources and stuff like that. Of course, in the longer term, it's actually going for the carbon capture and storage. As you mentioned, perhaps at the moment there is no commercially viable carbon capture storage projects there are, but there are a lot of the pilot projects that's ongoing at the moment. The elements of carbon capture is actually there. It's just putting it all together. And we actually require not only the policies from the various governments, but also perhaps some funding to ensure that the carbon capture and storage is actually viable in the longer term.
Many people listening to this may find the idea that someone who works or someone in charge of an international gas union asking for funding is slightly risible, given the amount of money that fossil fuel providers, oil, gas, make around the world. The idea that multinational companies need funding, slightly risible. Why would anyone need to fund CCS when there is plenty of money out there already made by these huge companies to fund it themselves?
Well, the companies that actually is making money, of course, is the international oil companies. But a lot of these resources actually belongs to the national oil companies, organization which are actually run by the governments themselves. Now, in order to make sure that some of these projects, because they are huge in nature, of course, you need a portion of it, public and private funding at the same time. So you need actually both parties to come forward and actually address the issue appropriately, rather than just coming from the business sector itself. So you need, I guess, certain funding in that area to make sure that the viability of such a project goes ahead and be addressing some of these issues that's facing us going forward.
Okay, many people often talk about gas as being a clean fuel. It's certainly, as you said, there's no doubt that it's cleaner than coal. How effective are regulations around the world in ensuring it's a cleaner fuel yet? Clearly, in Europe, there are strict regulations on gas-powered stations. Are the same regulations there in China, in India, and other parts of the world? And is that necessary in order to make gas a cleaner fuel?
Well, in terms of the demand for gas, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, it's not so much in terms of understanding that gas actually will address not only the security of energy issues, but also in terms of addressing some of the environmental issues. The issue for Asia is more in terms of where would actually the demand, or where actually the supply will come from versus actually the demands. The issue mainly arises is actually in US as well as in Europe. In terms of gas is actually not part of the long-term strategy as far as making sure that it is part and parcel of the sustainable energy system going to the future. So I think this is more issue of the Western countries versus really in the Asia Pacific region, or even for the Middle East and North African region as such.
Is there a need for more technology transfer between Western countries or the developed world and the developing world in terms of ensuring that gas is a cleaner fuel?
Well, as far as clean fuels, to a certain extent, yes, but also in terms of making sure the availability of gas. For example, in the unconventional gas, in shale gas, for example, some of the technologies that has been developed, especially in the US, in terms of how can it be replicated elsewhere and make it a success, is actually one of the areas perhaps that actually be done. And I'm sure the US have done a lot of in terms of the Obama administration, making sure that the Chinese exploit shale gas to a certain extent as much as they could, as compared to the US, is one of the, I guess, the approaches that's actually done by the US in that area.
And Dr. Hasdim, you mentioned shale gas. It's a hugely controversial form of gas at the moment, particularly in the UK where I'm from. Fracking is regarded by many people as hugely environmentally damaging. Using chemicals can even cause earthquakes. Is it really an environmentally sustainable form of energy if you take into account the whole cycle?
Well, if you look in terms of some of the issues, there are 3 or 4 issues regarding shale extraction. And I think for us, there's a lot of misconception, misinformation about the process itself. Yeah, if you look in terms of hydraulic fracking, for example, it has been around for more than 60 years. And there's 1.1 million wells have actually been drilled as far as that's concerned. So there are mitigation which is being done. If you actually do the drilling in I guess in a sustainable manner, in a proper manner, right, with steel casing, with concrete casings and so forth, then you don't actually get any of these so-called problems of affecting, I guess, water aquifers and so on and so forth. And where actually shale is found is actually much, much deeper than where the water aquifers are. See? And of course, the issue of, in terms of the chemicals in the hydraulic fracking itself, well, it consists 1% out of a total of 100% of water that's being used. And a lot of these chemicals that are actually being used are actually sort of domestic available chemicals, and they have been used, as I mentioned, for a long, long time. So there's really not much of an issue there. I think the issue is in terms of how these messages has been put forward, how it has been cut across. And of course, the industry needs to address some of these issues vigorously, and at the same time making sure that its operations are up to the standards that's normally done in the oil and gas industry.
Is it important, though, from a point of view of as a gas leader as you are, that you enforce this regulation around the world? Because it's all very well saying some of these chemicals are domestically available, but if I pour lots of bleach, which is domestically available, into my local river, the fish aren't going to like it. Is it important from your point of view that you and other leaders in the gas industry ensure that companies around the world follow these regulations that you've been talking about and clean up their act?
Yeah, I guess as far as we're concerned, of course, we would like to self-regulate the industry per se, but if it comes to the extent that it requires actually regulation, we would actually most welcome, because that will actually improve the standards of operations in this sort of so-called quote-unquote controversial areas, and actually will help the industry overall as far as its exploitation of shale gas. Yeah.
Okay, and finally, in terms of the energy mix, which you mentioned earlier on, and obviously a lot of countries are diversifying, ensuring, particularly if energy security concerns, they're not relying on one form of energy. What is the future? What is the future goal in terms of gas and the world energy mix? What could we be looking at in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Well, as far as gas is concerned, we believe that gas will actually be staying here for a long, long time to come. One is that, of course, the world is going for this so-called sustainable energy system going forward, with renewables playing a major part of it. But it requires also a baseload requirements for that. And gas, with its properties of clean, affordable, reliable, secure source, will actually help the world to come to that landing in the future, providing the base load. It can be switched on and off fairly quickly, very well enough. And at the same time, going forward with the new technology of CCS coming along, with biogas coming along as well, it will be really part and parcel of ensuring that the world has a sustainable energy going forward. So.
And finally, what are the reserves looking like then? If we talk about the next 20, 30, 40 years, is there enough gas? Are we seeing peak gas in the next 30, 40 years?
You could have, even with the unconventional gas at the moment, we have actually increased the reserve from 60 to 250 years, which is actually equivalent to coal. And there are still also potential of methane hydrates, which is almost impossible at the moment to really determine. But that will provide us with almost, I guess, a huge amount of gas reserves around to sustain the requirements of the future world energy requirements.